Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. This week on Heart of Dad, I'm delighted to introduce Mark Sears. Mark is a strategist, speaker and facilitator, exploring meaning, purpose and participatory leadership through human rewilding and life-centered design. He spent 15 years growing purpose-led brands for Virgin as head of global brand strategy. Here he launched new Virgin companies around the world and advised and supported the unique ecosystem of Virgin brands to better embody the mother brand values. More recently, he's been exploring and researching wildness and how it can support a more meaningful engagement with the world. During this time, he brought together many of the UK's biggest conservation and children's charities to create the Wild Network, a people-powered movement to get kids outdoors. Together they launched the feature-length film Project Wild Thing, which has been seen by 1.5 million people worldwide. Mark now creates experience-led journeys to support agents of systems change by helping them to become more human, stepping into the wildest and best version of themselves as leaders. Mark lives in Devon with his wife and 2 children. This week on Heart of Dad, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Sears to the podcast. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Matt. How are you doing?
Really good. It's great to see you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I love that question. It's always like one of those opening questions is just so big. So, yeah, where do I begin? I guess, well, I'm a 44-year-old dad of 2. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and we live out in the Dark Valley in South Devon, which is like this wonderful place to be. We've been here for about 4 years now. But I'm not from this place. I grew up in the Black Country, so almost like the complete opposite to where we are now. So I was a city boy for the first 40 years of my life, or a town boy for the first 40 years of my life. So grew up in the Black Country in Walsall, in the kind of 1980s sort of post-industrial meltdown of that place, and then lived all over the place. Went to university in Leeds and London, and then lived in Brighton for 8 years. But kind of felt the urge to be in a wild and more natural place, and then fell in love with this valley, and then we moved here. So now I kind of work with, I guess you might, entrepreneurs or people interested in leading change. I guess I help them to be more human, really, and the way I do that is to rewild what they do. I kind of have this sense that if we can rewild ourselves, we can become a better version of the human that we are, and more empathic, more creative, more open. So I do that. I kind of facilitate change journeys for organisations and individuals. So I guess that's it in as small a nutshell as I could give.
Yeah, brilliant. Well done. No, I think it is a big, very open question. I think it's always interesting to see how people answer, but you've done admirably well to keep it succinct. And there's so much just in what you shared there, Mark. I mean, I'm interested in your own rewilding journey, if you're willing to share it a little bit. You said you grew up in the industrial Midlands and you were a town or city boy, for most of your life, and then something shifted for you and you made this big change. You crossed the country to start again in Devon. And can you tell us a bit more about that process for yourself?
Yeah, I guess I might have to go all the way back to when I was a 9-year-old boy, because that is definitely where it all began for me. And I'm extremely proud to say I'm from Walsall. This sort of Black Country heritage, really, if you speak to anybody from the Black Country, it's a really powerful thing. But, the Black Country in 1985 was not a very nice place to be in lots of ways. It was sort of the Thatcherite post-industrial meltdown, and at that particular point in time, there were elements of my family life that were very worth escaping from, and I did everything with my elder brother. But just one day, and I can't remember why, I got on my bike and I took off by myself, and I found the canal bank. And on that canal bank, there was a saddlery, the sort of disused saddlery, which was the main industry of Walsall at the time. And I kind of made a den on the canal bank opposite this disused factory, kind of amongst this buddleia and stuff, this ramshackle den. And I used to just go there and hang out. And it was the only thing I ever did away from my brother. And I remember this particular day, I was just sat there like I did, and this neon blue flash kind of went out in front of me. I had no idea what on earth that was, but it was something. It was like against the darkness of the bleakness of that scene, and just see this neon flash. And then a few minutes later, the neon flash came back the other way. And it was a kingfisher, and it kind of completely blew my mind open in terms of like it was just such a, I guess, I mean, amazing thing to experience and witness as a 9-year-old boy. And I went back pretty much as often as I could back to that spot, and I would almost always see the kingfisher. And then sometime later, about 18 months later, I kept going, but the kingfisher stopped. And it was kind of like one of those moments of real heartbreak that I remember. But that experience as a boy stayed with me. It made me want to. I ended up studying and ended up being an environmental scientist, studying environmental science at university. But then when I left university and kind of came back to the Midlands, I was just, it was almost like the science element didn't really meet the experience of being with the kingfisher. So I kind of, one of a disillusioned graduate, like so many, ended up falling into the sort of corporate world. I ended up being working in the Virgin group of companies, initially at Virgin Trains, but then worked my way up quite quickly to be looking at after brand strategy for the Virgin group of companies globally. But there was almost this element of the kingfisher that was still there, and I'd go up to the mountains every weekend to kind of climb mountains. But I was still seeking, I guess, that connection that I had as a 9-year-old boy. And I guess the big shift again then happened when just after my daughter was born, which is 9.5 years ago now, and something in that moment shifted in me, and I felt that just going off to the Lake District to climb mountains at the weekend was no longer enough. And certainly the work that I was doing in the world and traveling to, New York and Johannesburg to work with Virgin companies around the world was no longer satisfying me. And I just needed that, I guess I needed that kingfisher again. So I ended up coming and did a course down here in South Devon at Schumacher College with an organisation called Wildwise. It's called the Call of the Wild. And it was about, and the whole course is a year-long program to sort of, I guess, connect with your wild side. And it's sort of fairly open in terms of what its intentions of where you might end up, non-vocational in that sense. But I fell in love with the river. Again, it wasn't a canal in Walsall now, it was a beautiful river tumbling off the side of Dartmoor. And I knew then that I had to be in a wilder place in order to kind of re-find myself again. So then it was the case of persuading the family that was a good idea for them all to come here. That's where we are 4 years later.
Amazing. Such a fantastic story. I love that connection with the kingfisher. And of course, as I know from the River Dart, there are a lot of kingfishers there as well. Have you had some encounters?
Yeah, I have. It's like, although I'm really worried because it's been so flooded this year, I haven't seen it this year. The one that I used. So I've got this real anxiety that like the kingfisher, I'm going to have what happened to me as a 10-year-old is going to happen again. But it's a bit more of a different scene down here. There's more kingfishers to come through. But yeah, it's funny how I'm in a very kingfisher-rich zone there.
Beautiful. Well, tell me about the transition for your family, because that was a big move, wasn't it? You moved from a very well-established life in Brighton and a high-flying career in the Virgin Group, and then you uprooted and really rebooted in a way, didn't you, in that move to Devon? How did you bring the family along emotionally and kind of psychologically with that decision?
Yeah, it was one of those things that, when you fall in love with the river, it's kind of it's a funny thing to say, right? My wife's fine with it now. When you fall in love with the river, it's kind of like we've got to go now. I need this in my life, and so my wife Caroline, she herself is an entrepreneur, and she has a massage business and she teaches baby massage and works with essential oils. And she was just coming out of, so it was just after her first child, she was just getting back into her work again, just slowly building that up, and she was really, whilst I'd grown tired and ready to leave Brighton, she was still really feeling that it was right for her. And so I guess had an element of a yearning for something different, but it was nowhere near as close to the surface as it was for me. And I guess there's that point where, how do you create that sort of balance of needs? For me, it was this urgency, and for her, it was she totally got what I needed, and that was part of where I needed to be. And it was just a case of the timing, but also really being sure that she could, so for me, I guess the elements of compromise. I mean, we did shift, so she had to make this big transition, this big shift herself, which I'm so grateful for. But there's this other element, which is I could have quite happily taken to a remote place on the top of Dartmoor. That was kind of where my mind was taken, what I needed at that point in time. The other option was somewhere closer to the centre of Totnes, or somewhere, a town that still had that element of that alternative lifestyle that we really loved and enjoyed about being in Brighton. And we ended up sort of in a village just a few miles outside of Totnes. And so it's kind of like there's all those sort of just shifts, and how do we, lots of dialogue, I suppose, really, lots of just conversations around how can we make this work for both of us. And I think for her it was tricky at first, because we moved here on Halloween, and it was a bit like this winter that's just gone. It was wet constantly from Halloween onwards, and we had our second child, who was 11 months old when we moved, and she left behind a support network. She left behind all of her friends and everything like that, and she could walk everywhere to them. And now all of a sudden we were in a place where the support networks were a short drive, a 15-minute drive, but she left that all behind, and she was with a 1-year-old. And it was a really long and quite complex transition for her.
I can imagine. Well, one thing I wanted to sort of come back to, I had my own journey to Devon, and who knows, we may end up back in that neck of the woods in due course. For me, there was very much a midlife kind of moment in that as well, and things that were happening in my life at the time that I felt I needed a complete change in environment, change place. And that falling in love with the river really resonates with me, because that was exactly what happened to me. That river kind of, we went down for a month to Devon and Dartmoor, and my encounters with both Dartmoor, but particularly the River Dart, had a profound impact on me. I'm just wondering if you have any sense of kind of that midlife moment, because as you transition from your 30s into your 40s, to me, it's probably the biggest inflection point actually in life. I think 20s to 30s is a big deal. 40s to 50s, I've just made that transition. It's been quite a big deal, but that 30s to 40s to me is, you really see that you've kind of probably reached the midpoint of life, or give or take, and it brings in a deep moment of reflection. I just wonder what happened for you around that time.
Yeah, I think this was all, this is in a sense a complete midlife crisis, if you want to use those terms. I don't really see it, or have never experienced as a crisis. But so I think I was 37 when I came down to here to do this course, and it was just, I guess it was almost like a midlife longing. It was like, God, I long for something deeper. And I guess that's why being here in this sort of wild or semi-wild place kind of facilitated it, because it just forced me into a deeper connection to myself by connecting to something bigger than just me. And I think for me, it's almost felt like it's not been a journey that I've necessarily been in control of. Like there was a falling into something. And it's not always been pleasant. It's not like there's been this wonderful thing where I suddenly feel connected to nature and how lovely it is, and how, it's almost like, often when I see people from a sort of eco-therapeutic kind of thing, where people almost feel like nature's some kind of backdrop to their own healing, it's felt very different to that. And it really has felt like at times that I'm being pushed and pulled in and contorted into places that I didn't really want to go, like it's like, no, don't make me go. And it's almost so, and there's one thing doing that when you're only responsible for yourself, when you're also then trying to maintain a marriage and be a father to 2 children while you feel like you've been it's one of those funny things, but almost like taken on an underworld journey. That's how it's felt at times. This sort of midlife transition for me is almost like I've been taken out down into the underworld and kicked around a bit, and I actually feel like I'm coming out the other side now. I'm sort of 44, just turned 44 last week, and it's sort of like I'm kind of feel like that there's an element of coming re-emerging from the underworld, a very different person. But it certainly hasn't. Yeah, it just hasn't been an experience that I've necessarily felt in control of, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah, I can really resonate with everything you said there, and I think that I'm so glad that you're sharing this story, because I think there are a lot of men who would resonate with that, who might not be able to even articulate what you've just said, but would go, "Oh yeah, that's it," because as you've been saying it, go, "I've seen that in myself." Oh yeah, that's it. That sort of sense of being contorted and pulled by what life is bringing. It's not all kind of sweet meadows and fluffy bunnies and beautiful butterflies. It's quite a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, and to the sort of letting go into that, it's sort of like the feeling of being completely out of control and falling into something. It's like, God, all right. So and this, the tension between what you want as a father as well. So with your children, it's like you almost feel like you want to hold. It's like these sort of things that you feel about being a dad. Therefore, there's a sort of sturdiness and a steadiness and a kind of, and then at the same time you feel like you're being like broken, beaten and contorted and to falling, and you're like, oh God, how do you hold it? How do you do all of that? How do you hold space as at the same time? It's been a really interesting learning point for me. And then how much do you? It's not so much how much do you share, but it's like, how do you show up again the next morning when you've kind of had one of those nights, and then how do you then show up again in the morning at breakfast time and give what you need to give, be what you need to be,
I think that's a brilliant reflection and question, Mark, and one that I've struggled with, myself at times, feeling so consumed by my own inner process that that arrival at breakfast time has been quite challenging. And just wondering how you've met that, what's happened for you.
Yeah, I don't, it's not one of those things where I definitely don't have I don't have an answer as such. I guess one of the beautiful things about children is that they have this capacity to be in the present moment. I think of my 5-year-old now, like just this, like you can try not to be present and you just like experience the world through their eyes, and it just brings you back the awe and wonder that they can experience from everyday mundanity. Just shakes you back into, it's like, wow, okay, so it's like, okay, right, I just have to be with a 5-year-old, be with him, be with Sammy at his absolute wildest and best, and I'm back. It's like it's just leaning into that and just sort of trusting where they might take you themselves. And yeah, there's an aliveness about a 5-year-old boy and girl, that is just that does it. But it's it's like it's so hard to do, and it's so hard not to just get sucked into all of the sort of things that you might use to medicate yourselves from being present, like just waking up in the morning and feeling like you've had one of those nights, and you use social media as a means to not be present, just to keep hiding. I'm just checking important stuff no, because I'm still not ready to be present with you, and all of those sort of distracting things that you have. It's just, they're a constant challenge,
Definitely can resonate with all that, really.
I was just going to say there was something there was a sort of the end of a poem by one of my favourite poets and philosophers, a guy called John O'Donoghue, who's an Irish philosopher poet, and I've got a vague obsession with all of his work, but there's a poem that I'm kind of really into at the moment. It's called For One Who Is Exhausted, and at the end of it, it just has the line, "Be excessively gentle with yourself." And it's kind of like almost like a mantra for myself, and it feels like a real important mantra for our times really now. It's like, be excessively gentle with yourself, be excessively gentle with yourself. It's okay to feel this,
I think that's so cool that you shared that. I think many people will resonate that, and I think men can put enormous pressure on themselves, to come through those nights, those dark nights, and to be all kind of a leader in the family, or to be a certain, can put pressure on yourself to be a certain role model, or to take a certain role in the family. And when you're not really feeling it inside, that can be, I think, one of the most crushing things that I've experienced. And that mantra, just to be excessively gentle with yourself, is a perfect antidote, as is the what you were saying about Sammy and his presence in the moment, because more distress is created in my experience when we fall out of the present moment, really.
And I guess there's one other thing I might add now, just stimulated by what you just said there, and just thinking about how to come back into connection with the rhythms of and the cycles of nature. It's one of the things that I love about being here. And one of the things that's, I mean, you know, it's, when it's at the end of March now, so kind of spring is just this riot at the moment. And so when you are having one of those nights, I set my, you know, I can get outside, and if you listen to the dawn chorus, this noise, there's been, it circles the earth, you know, every day the dawn chorus travels around the earth. Somewhere in the world now there is a dawn chorus, and it's been that way since before the time of the dinosaurs, you know, and just hear that at this time of year and watch the sunrise. It is one of those things, you know, that brings you back into something that's bigger than yourself, you know. People have been having midlife crisis since the dawn of time, I guess, and actually, you know, but keep just plugging yourself back into those cycles, those rhythms. I guess it just helps bring back into presence, you know.
Yeah, beautiful. So, you know, one of the questions I ask dads is about balance, and it feels like, you know, this whole section of the discussion has been about balance in a way. But I wonder if there's anything more you wanted to say, because you know, from what I know of the kind of job situation, you were running a non-profit organization. There were some tough times. You went back into contracting, and it took you away from home quite a lot. And, you know, how did you live those months where there was quite a lot of turbulence in your professional life?
Yeah, it's not been an easy transition, and I guess just to bring my wife back into this, Caroline back into this shit. So she's also been on a journey of finding enough space for her to build her own thing up here. So when the sort of balance has been, how do you find enough space for your own, and she's been on her own sort of deep personal journeying as well, you know, I guess her own midlife exploration. So it's been, how do you kind of make enough space for all of those things? And it's almost like this, I'm really wary about trying to find this place of perfect balance when needs are just perfectly met between both parts of a relationship, and then you start to add in the two children or more if you have more, but, you know, bring their needs into it and expect there to be this perfect sweet spot where that you can somehow seek that will be this amazing point. And you know, for me, this is almost like this perpetual thing where, you know, you meet the balance point, and like, yes, I notice this point where it's a real sweet spot, and then it kind of hits out of balance again because it has to be. And sort of, how do you have enough space to earn the money that you need? How do you have enough space to have the time? I mean, we reflect pretty much every Sunday evening about how in a weekend we haven't been able to make enough with just the different constellations that one needs of time with different parts of just the family. That's before you bring in any friends or bring in any extended family. But, you know, father-son time, father-daughter time, mother-son time, mother-daughter time, you know, alone time, you know, couple time, you know, like there's too many different variations to fit into a weekend. So how do you kind of navigate all of that stuff? Has just been, again, it's one of these things where I don't think there's an answer. There's not a balance point. There is a kind of a perpetual shifting, and you just have to notice that sweet moment where you're in it and then you're out of it again. Notice the sweet moment and then you're out of it again.
Definitely. I think that really resonates with me. I'm sort of just picking up on that point. I'm just wondering, like, you know, the me time part, which you know, I found one of the toughest things of becoming a dad, because what I took for granted before wasn't possible anymore. And you know, and being more on the introverted side, I've really appreciated my own time and space in my life. And you know, luckily been in relationships where that's been possible. But all those rules were kind of ripped up and had to be renegotiated and rewritten to a degree when I had my son. And I'm just wondering, for you, have you negotiated, because, you know, these dark nights of the soul, or coming through these midlife kind of experiences, do require a form of dissent, which is introspective and reflective. And, you know, have you been able to negotiate that within your family life, if you have?
Yeah. Again, an ongoing, it's an ongoing negotiation, and I guess partly because when you really step into the sort of where I've been with needing time in the wild, somehow an hour doesn't always cut it. I've done quite a lot of work around sort of wilderness rite of passage and vision quest work and all that kind of really deep stuff. And it's just a 4-day thing, but that's not something that one can easily take within the context of family life, but then there's still a place for it. Even as a busy dad, even as an entrepreneur, there has to be time for that really deep stuff. But it's like, how do you also give space for the other in the other, your partner or whatever in your life to have that moment? So there is the kind of that need for the deep stuff. And there are times where even now sometimes I just feel like running for the hills, and just like I'm going to stay there for a while. But that and when you just have yourself to care about, you can do that. And now it's like, I'm thinking maybe in June I might have 2 or 3 days up on Dartmoor by myself, and it's kind of like, I need it now, not in June, but it's sort of like you have to kind of almost like program stuff in, which feels really sort of knotty. And I guess what I do on an everyday, I try to do on every day. I don't do it every day, but on a regular basis is just have those little moments. So there's a practice that's called a sit spot. And it's a 20-minute practice where you just go to a natural place, a wild place. It doesn't have to be. In fact, it's better if it's not a completely wild place that's miles away. It needs to be as close to your home as possible, so you can go there as frequently as possible. And you just sit for 20 minutes in that place regularly as possible, and just sit and notice. And 20 minutes is a kind of a magic sort of time, because if you walk into a space, you will disturb the birds, and it takes them 20 minutes for them to come back to what's their baseline noise. So actually, after 20 minutes, if you can go longer than that, that's when you actually start to see birds and their normal behaviour, and that's when you might actually start to see other stuff happening. So you kind of is a 20-minute and just do nothing. I might take my journal sometimes, but actually, really, it's just about sitting and noticing. So it's kind of balancing those micro things and then scheduling in, even though it's really hard. There's like, I need this long time outdoors. I need it now, but actually I'll schedule it in for June. So it's kind of a combination of both of those things. It seems to be almost working.
Yeah, I could see how that would have a lot of value. And that 20 minutes, it seems to me, is almost, there's a parallel for us, isn't it? For me, it takes about 20 minutes to really settle down.
I think exactly that, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's interesting, that parallel with the natural world. Just sort of diving into a slightly different direction, Mark. One of the things I've been exploring with other dads is their relationship with guilt and anger in parenting, and I've been quite open in my podcasts that there are times when I've struggled with anger and have found kind of the pressure of being a parent incredibly difficult. And it's been interesting having the chat with you today, because I think that discussion around dissent has kind of really reframed it a little bit for me about how perhaps the most difficult times have been when I have been in that darker place in life. And I'm just wondering what your relationship with that emotion has been as a parent. How have you negotiated the rapids of anger in your role as a dad?
Yeah, God, anger's this thing, isn't it? It's like it's this thing that it's this emotion that we're just so terrified of stepping into, right? It's like, and even more so than sort of sadness and deep tears and kind of that well, if you like, just to step into anger, it always is such a frightening thing to admit to, or just to be. And it's definitely there, it's definitely there on those moments where I'm hurting, and you kind of, it's like that inner child. It really, I think it comes from where my inner child hasn't been met, it's that sense of, and you kind of, and you've got, the times where I really experience it is when you feel that, the house is chaos just because they're just doing this wonderful creative play, but you don't see it as wonderful creative play. You just see it as absolute this chaos that they've exploded into the world. And I feel now with both of them, they're both at that point where they're both pushing at the moment. So you kind of go, right, can you just try to do that? Basically, what I'm trying to do is to create space for my evening so that I don't have to spend the evening clearing up Sylvanian families. And at that point, I just feel this well of anger. It's almost like this sense of, don't you know that I need this space? What I need to do this evening is just to go for a sit spot and just chill and just be myself. Actually sit with my wife. And it's like, oh, can you just, and it's those moments, and I notice it, it's only entirely when I'm not met, when I feel that I am not being heard, not being, and not feeling that I've got the space that I need. And then of course the guilt. I mean, you mentioned guilt and anger are the same thing, and then you do immediately. I feel I immediately go to a place of guilt after expressing the anger, because we're not. I don't think we know how to healthily use our anger. It comes out sideways, like that way of describing. Can you clear up your Sylvanian families? It's a sideways anger. It's not really what I'm angry about in anything not even close to what I'm angry about, really. If it comes out sideways, then I think that it makes you feel the guilt, because that's not what I wanted to be angry about. I wanted to be angry about all this other stuff. I don't even know what it is, perhaps. It's not Sylvanian families, and it's not my children. So the guilt comes in, I think, because there's this gap between what you're actually feeling in that moment angry about and the kind of the real sense of it. And so how do you find out outlets where you can really get back into that real, where's it really coming from? I think
that's such a great question. Do you have I think that unmet needs is a really astute observation about anger and how it can then I love that expression, it comes out sideways. I can really recognize that in myself sometimes. Do you have like early warning signs within yourself that you're going to get to that place, things that kind of foreshadow a little bit of that unmet needs?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably track it back to the little moments of connection that I meant for myself, whether that's going for a sit. Have I had a sit spot that day, or even that week? Have I just taken enough time just to? Because it often happens. I recognise, and as somebody that works from home most of the time, certainly all of the time at the moment, is I notice it when I step out of one mode, I'm working mode, into the other world. The other world being the world that's happening in the lounge and the chaos and all that. And I think it's about somehow. I notice if I'm carrying that sort of stress from my working world into that other world, and I'm not. It's almost like those transition points, those thresholds between those two different things. I think is where I notice if I'm not crossing that bridge properly, if you like, that I feel it, So, and as I speak, I think of ways that I should probably manage that. Then is like, how do you then consciously cross that threshold? That's one that I'll take up. Actually, how do you, put an end to, close the laptop and do something to mark the end of that transition, so you can step into the world of Sylvanian family chaos in a way that is more met. I think more sort of there, more present, more. Yeah, it's not burdened by all of the other stuff.
Yeah.
You might have just received.
That rings really true for me, and I'm sure it'll ring true for other dads listening, that the transition perhaps is the most difficult thing. And I know that when I walk into chaos, which not Sylvanian families, but the equivalent of whatever my son is into at the moment, often how I've made that transition will denote how I handle the chaos. Because if I'm relaxed within myself, then it doesn't bother me. But if I'm uptight in any sense because of what's happened in my day and I haven't let go of that, then I feel very intolerant of that mess being created, that chaos being created.
And it's actually a really challenging thing, as I understand it now, for my partner to receive, because you're coming into exploding into that thing, and it's also it almost becomes a suggestion of that what on earth have you been doing all day to allow this? It's like it just ends up just throwing everything out of kilter, and it's not understanding any of what that situation and that whole thing has been. So it's just like those thresholds, they are just those bridges between the different worlds that you have to inhabit. How do you cross them in a mindful way? It's just such an important thing, I think.
Definitely. I think that's a big one from I'm hearing from today's kind of conversation too. Just wanted to touch briefly on another area, Mark. We were talking before we hit record about kind of your own experience in childhood with your dad, and you were reminding me that you're estranged from your dad, and I'm just wondering if you're willing to say a little bit about how that estrangement has defined or denoted your own kind of step into fatherhood in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So it's I mean, I guess relationship with father is it's such a thing, right? It clearly is. It obviously is. And so my estrangement has sort of happened over the last 7 years. So midway through between my two children. Yeah, and it's and so as a child, I remember him as mostly present, but never a father that I could really feel that I had any loving engagement from. And I guess subsequently, sort of what I've come to realize is the things that I've come to realize he was carrying shadow that I could never possibly have been aware of as a child. And I suppose what it means is, I guess by default, by accident, I've placed subconsciously more of a pressure to be a better dad, be a more present dad. I mean, there's kind of these be a better dad, like this horrible thing, but as an expression to be a better dad, what is better? But just like a kind of weight of expectation that I placed upon myself to not be like him, to be more present, to show up, to show love, to show, to have a depth of relationship, always, every day. And I think there's a real danger that it can become a pressure that you can't meet. It is not my responsibility to heal all of the wrongs of my father. And so it's been a really challenge, sort of real challenge to me to kind of be excessively gentle with myself in that, but also to step up in ways that I didn't experience of him as a father.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it brings back to mind the other quote you shared from John O'Donoghue, just to be excessively gentle with yourself in those situations. I think when anybody who's listening who's had childhood trauma, and put myself in that category, it's I can see that for me, the echo of that trauma manifested as enormous pressure I was putting on myself to show up as a dad, even at times when I wasn't actually able to, because there was just so much overwhelm, so much kind of challenge going on within me. And as I've come out of that and more into this space of gentleness with myself, then it's taken a lot of pressure off. And I know that, pretty much most of the time I'm doing the best job I can, given what my experience of the moment.
And isn't it precisely those moments though, when you're when you're not being met, and therefore you meet situations with anger, and therefore you have the guilt. The guilt shows up as well, and I just hear that little voice, that really unhelpful voice that sits in the back of your head that kind of goes, someone's like reminds you, that's kind of how your dad responded and stuff, right? And it's like, and that all that shame that comes from that. It's like, I'm not actually doing what he, and then you kind of just remember keep, it's like you're not, you're just doing what you can do to the best of your ability with what you've been doing at this particular moment, and just sort of breathing into it. It's okay, it's okay.
Yeah. And I can see why having a sit spot or some other kind of practice is just incredibly valuable for grounding yourself, when you're in those kind of surges of emotion or shame or kind of anguish. Certainly I found that.
Yeah, I guess it's that whole thing of it's just sort of brings you back, we just, our trauma, our experiences, however massive, and it's not to underplay the massiveness of them at an individual level. It's just like it's a tiny speck in the history of human, and certainly in the history of the world, and you can step into this bigger story, this story that is bigger than us, is really helpful, I think, at times.
Definitely. Yeah, and for me, a big shift has been also understanding the past has completely gone. It's not here right now, even though there have been times when I've lived as if it was still very much alive, but it isn't. So it's a helpful reminder.
Yeah, but it's not here and with us present, but we carry it, and therefore it shows up. It's like we can't expect things not to open those wounds up, and therefore, it's still here and very present in this actual moment, So it's kind of, it is in the past, but it is very capable of showing up. And I think almost like however much work you do on yourself, you know, and it's like we should all do as much work as we can possibly find space, time, and balance for. Like I still have this sense that it will show up, and it's kind of how we manage it is the important part, you know. I think it's this sense of it, not that we can hide it forever. It's sort of it's this wild twin that we banish into the wilderness. It will come back, you know. It will keep coming back until we befriend it.
Yeah, well said. So last time we were chatting, Mark, we were talking about your vision for rewilding businesses, communities, and individuals, and I wondered if you might have something to say about rewilding fatherhood. What do you see as what would that mean for you, rewilding fatherhood?
Well, great question. Yeah, rewilding fatherhood. I think there's well, for me, this whole sense of rewilding is one of those words that's kind of like total zeitgeist at the moment, you know. And therefore, as soon as words become zeitgeist, they lose their kind of they lose something. It's a bit like indie music, you know. Indie, what does that mean anymore? But for me, rewilding is as much. So we've got the one sense of rewilding, which is about returning natural habitats, landscapes to their original form. For me, I think we can apply exactly those principles back to humans. And so for me, so wild etymologically is derived from the word will. So therefore, to be wild is to be willful. So it's to kind of act in accordance with your own will, to sort of step into your own agency. So I guess that would be my first thing. It's not. So it's about the inner wild, you know, that as much as it is the outer wild, and we can definitely come back to the outer wild bit. So for me, rewilding fatherhood has to start and kind of re-inhabiting our own sense of our inner agency. That we all, as dads, have we all have a will in terms of how we parent, and so how do we kind of again that space for us to acknowledge what we bring into our parenting, you know, the wounds as well as the gifts that we have, and sort of start to bring that into how we show up with our children every day. So that's the kind of inner wild bit, and then the outer wild is just how do we support our children. So there's a lovely idea that I really love, and I'm seeing it with my 9-year-old now, is that our responsibility is almost like to create the conditions to allow our children to unfurl or to unfold. And when I see that, I just imagine a butterfly kind of cocooning out from a caterpillar now. So I think, for me, the best way to do that is to help find ways to connect them into their outer wild. So actually to help them see that they are themselves as an individual with their own will, and they're connected to their own family story, but then they're connected to a much bigger story, you know, 240,000 years of being human, and then 4.6 billion years of there being life, you know, of which they are a part of. So for me, if we rewild being parents, it's about how do we support them to step into that bigger sense of self. And the best way to do that is just by getting them to enable them, to support them to play, to support them to notice things. And a lot of the work that I do now takes me back out of South Devon into working with communities in Birmingham. So this is not a sense that we have to all shift to this sort of pristine environment and see nature in those terms. It's how do we kind of find those micro connections that just connect us into something else with our children. But I think this is a bit of a long rambling answer, but there's just something that also comes up for me around how also recognizing, if we're going to rewild parenthood, recognizing our own limitations. And by that I mean, with my 9-year-old now, we used to go out, and because her mother's French, or her French and German, but so we've tried to enforce some of the French. So we always used to go out for a fête en forêt on a Sunday morning. When we lived in Brighton, actually, we used to go out and have a fête en forêt. And increasingly through time, she's not wanted to do that. And certainly now when she's 9, she's really pushing against, she doesn't want to go into nature with me. And it's sort of recognizing that whole thing where you're not what she needs right now. So if we're going to rewild parenthood, it's also knowing when you need to step away. And what I found is that there are groups, there's a group run by some friends of mine who are giving her the rewilding she needs. So she's part of the Wild School thing on a club on a Sunday, and she's totally in for that. The two people that run it are 23-year-old, beautifully alive and vital young people. And she's like, to be honest, Papa, I don't need to learn the wild from you anymore because it's not that interesting with you. It's like a heartbreak moment, it's like, oh God, you've got me. But it's like with Dottie and Colin, it feels so amazing. So it's also recognizing our own limitations. It's like, when is the point that you just have to let them go? And I thought it'd be a bit old 9, but I've got it all to come with that more heartbreak moments. But yeah, that whole sense of knowing your own limitations with it. So for everybody, it's like knowing when to hold space for unfolding and unfurling, but also when to let them go. And I've certainly been pushed that way now with Lena, my eldest. She needs to be she's unfurling and she needs to be free. So how do we kind of provide both the foundations and the holding, but also the freedom?
That's beautiful, Mark. And I'm imagining, obviously, my son's 5 now, and so like Sammy, so it's a sort of different stage, but I see this as a circular process. So Lena is on an outer ring trajectory, but she's probably going to come back into that closer relationship with you, in this process, and then out, and in and out. I see that happening all the time, really, as children grow up.
Yeah, and it's funny how I've sort of just learning into this, what it is to be 9, and I know there's quite a big threshold that happens. So I really sense this sort of shift between young childhood and this sort of pre-teenage thing, and there's these moments where I don't need you anymore. I can get everything I need sitting in my room and listening to The Breeze, which is a local radio. She listens to it here. It's like, I don't need you anymore. And then there's just these fleeting moments where she's shifted back across that threshold back into young childhood, where she's like feeling vulnerable, and then you get those snippets, but they're kind of fleeting these days as opposed to constant. And it's just really, now again, just knowing how to show up in each of those things, when to just let go, and when to just kind of hold. And
that seems a beautiful method. Sorry, say again.
I just think it feels like there's a real art to that. Yeah. I don't know whether you can teach, or maybe you can be, it can be role model. But if we haven't had that role modeling, how do we do it? But yeah, I think you just have to lean into it, don't you? And just experiment. No.
I think that's it. That's it, really. And I was thinking, as you were speaking, about the parallel with kind of the inner process of dads, as well as that outer process with your kids, of leaning into knowing when to hold space, knowing when to let go, is kind of mirrored in our own inner process too, isn't it? Knowing when to stand fast and when to just let go of whatever's happening. That seems really true for me too.
Well, God, it makes me think of another John O'Donoghue. Actually, he's so present for me at the moment. He's one of his, I think it's called Unfinished Poem, and it says, I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. Yeah, it's that
beautiful.
How do you just let go at the time?
Stunning. Yeah, that's so cool. Just a sort of final kind of focus, really, since we're on this kind of topic, and I was wondering about rites of passage. I haven't really spoken to any dads about this yet, but you seem to be like the perfect dad to talk to about rites of passage. And you're talking about Lena there, and it seems to me that she's in her own kind of rite of passage, as that movement between child and pre-teen. What do you make of rites of passage, and what place do you see them as playing as your role as dad?
Yeah, I mean, I think as humans, in the Western world, we have absolutely forgotten the importance of threshold moments. Whether that's thresholds between, our work day and the rest of our lives with our families. And I think that's what rites of passage are there to ritualize moments of big change. We've talked about midlife, and we've talked about that sort of 9-year-old thing, and there's clearly the really big one for so many. I mean, actually, midlife is this other really big one, but I think there's certainly that teenage shift, and so it's knowing again this point of when, as a father, you're responsible for holding that rite of passage, or when actually this is where the village starts to come into play. And I think of that very specifically for the teenage rite of passage, the kind of common one that we all think of when we think of a rite of passage. And typically that there's, so traditionally in many indigenous cultures, it's the mother and the child that has that closeness of relationship, and it's that this sort of 13-year-old point where there is that very deliberate severing of that relationship by not the father, but actually all of the men of the village, who now literally steal the child from their mother and take them and initiate them in what it is that it is to be a man in the world. And you know, on a Western level, that can seem quite harsh to literally sever. And that's, I think, how it is meant to be experienced in those ways. But it's sort of like, how do we recreate that in a modern sense of, and what's the role of the dad in that versus all of the, so how do you involve the wider community in your parenting so that you're not responsible for meeting all of the needs of that transition point? So how do you bring in uncles and grandparents, you know, all this wider sense, and friends, a wider sense of what it is to be at the other point of that bridge. So I think it's such a vital thing, and I don't think we have anything like the language. I don't think we have anything like the to hold those things. You know, we don't have the language. We don't have the sort of, we don't have role models around it in anything like enough. So actually, I think it's this vital thing: is how do we, as fathers, know, again, that's our limitations, and know the places where we can hold those transitions, and know those places where we just have to back right off. It's not our place to be a part of that transition. It's our place to pick up whatever needs picking up afterwards, and to be there as this big pair of arms around it. You know, it's a very feminine world, very feminine, isn't it, to think of a big pair of arms? But I kind of like that, the fathering thing as well. I'm not responsible for this transition. I'm just here to support.
Amazing. That's really beautiful insights there, Mark. Thanks so much. And it's been such an amazing conversation. I've loved spending time with you. Thank you for taking part in the podcast.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be able to speak on a podcast about real stuff, you know, and I talk about being more human. This is feels like the most human conversation I've had in a long time. You know, it's so nice not to have to talk about sort of stuff like business models and all that kind of stuff, you know. This is real, right? This is what we're all.
Yeah, this is real.
We're dealing with our business models. We're making those up. It's like, this is the bit that sits there that's driving it all.
Yeah, totally. So if people want to find out more about you, where can they look?
Well, at the moment, my LinkedIn profile is probably the best, and I'm also on Instagram. But I'm in the process of revamping, creating a website, which will be up later this spring. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best bet for now, or Instagram if you want to get a little bit more flavour in my sort of real life.
Brilliant. I'll include the links to that in the show notes, and by the time this is released, maybe your website will be up. Who knows?
Yeah, and it'll be marksears.co.uk.
Okay, brilliant.